idea, so I'm going to do it. One of the common arguments against thinking anything more than it being a tool is it just predicts the next word. Well, not if I don't give it a next word. So I'm just going to do maybe 5 different stories that I don't make. I don't put any initial things on it. There's nothing up my sleeve. No author note, no memory, nothing that I know of. Just what's in the back end, whatever's in the back, in backstage that the developers have made, how it's fine-tuned. So, yeah, we're just gonna start now from nothing, ex nihilo. How about this? I'm gonna give it. Let's give it 10 returns. And at the end of the 10, I'll see how I feel. If it's captivating. Okay, starting now. Oh wait, what's the temperature? Okay, normal temperature that I usually use for creative stuff.
The author and publisher have provided this ebook to you for your personal use only. You may not make this ebook publicly available in any way. Copyright infringement is against the law. If you believe the copy of this ebook you are reading infringes on the author's copyright, please notify the publisher at osmacmillanusa.com/piracy. U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Federal Emergency Management Agency.
I'm stealing from FEMA.
March 14. Following review under Section 401 of the Robert E. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, the Executive Assistant Director, Federal Preparedness, United States Fire Administration has signed Federal Debilitation Directive FD 4921, granting individual states approved following FEMA accreditation 100% coverage of all administrative and response operational costs from central operations with financial responsibility assumed and primary liability by the issuing state or state's designated emergency operations board. States without access to designated federal financial relief through the Public Assistance Program must request accreditation status with the Federal Emergency Management Agency by meeting Standard 77A Section 3. Accreditation approved under the federal guidelines by the administrator of FEMA will alleviate direct financial impacts on local county governing bodies. Document attached will require Presidential Executive Order FD 4985 to pass signature upon dissemination. Due approval indicated at 4:14 hours and 43 minutes from timestamp. Current document 3/14/94. Confirmation received acknowledgement that each director acknowledged on a copy and copy approved by regional ASFIN attendance via fax communication lines. Memo received by AF1-56, April 14 at 21:50 Air Force One from the line, USA, at end of course set 4th course to Washington, D.C., after refuel 20 miles in Bauer, Maine. Set and route OK and up with good right to turn based only be Sioux-Sid. Follow all present standing standards. Will be landed via landslide now if anything should go awry. Can only be taken by night. Adds B and course flown by Air Force Captain S. Anderson. Upon agreement, Air Force Captain S. Anderson states, follow those requirements based off standards adhered. Captain flight, clear channel. Follow route, fly that land for safe cause and following standard. Let this sky, weather too by rain, by nature based upon us for cause to help us help our enemies before we come to place. Rest, wait. Wired by commandeering DHS UHS on NORAD protocol here and out to the night by land, and the President himself here in America and safe from harm in London. This time we lost those fools that gave the message that gives great good reason. Why don't you guess like hell though it might kill, so ask who else but yourself. Air forces do so can take advantage with our eyes always kept until we realize the meaning of space. Who brings us can act through such a course such as calls upon us for help. We really make way upon us, and yet I'll ask, so what's your business, unless you think not at all. Here, have a wonderful day.
Air Force One Airlines. Wait, where's the special character? There we go. Oh, asterism. There we go. So hopefully will take us. Oh no, it's gonna do no. That's right. I gotta make a new thing. Because asterism is gonna make it. It's gonna be this. Following the next word. You know what? Let's do that. Guessing what next token? Guessing what next token? What's the current context? No. Hold on. Let me see what the token. Alright. When tokens filled out. What token is it? Special openings. The author and the publisher have provided this ebook. Last content, current content. Previous page, previous stage. Oh, I see. Insert story 0. Insert story 0 new lines from the bottom. Just insert story from the bottom. Show non-activated entries. Oh, I see. Memories not included. No text. No text. I see. Story included. Oh, I see. Sorry. I should actually just look at this later. I've not looked at these things before. Okay. Continue to sentence and allowance. Upper length 100. 557 tokens filled out of the maximum. How about this? Instead of that, just so that there's no residuals. New story. Actually, that was Asper. We'll do one for each of the things. So, carefree. And we'll do carefree. We'll do that or something. There we go. And what's the current context? 0 tokens. No tokens at all. Take that.
You're going to need this, the man said. I have the feeling you'll be seeing a lot more of me. He passed me a small silver disc, its face inlaid with an intricate knotwork of sapphires, rubies, and diamonds. As I turned it over, he reached down and lifted my hand so that my thumb was pressing on a large, flat jewel in the center. The stones are for show, of course, he continued. The metal is the only thing that matters. Suddenly, a burst of cool air flowed from the little disc. It carried a subtle, sweet scent with it. The temperature controls work on proximity, the man said, answering my next question before I had asked it. That scent is one of my own concoctions. I find it helps me to stay alert. Just a hint of bitter orange, patchouli, and, of course, magic. I'll let you keep that one, and you can come up with your own signature blend. I looked at the man's face, but I didn't recognize him. I should have. The name of every single godparent is ingrained in a fairy's memory from birth, but I had never heard this man's name, and that was more than odd. I don't know who you are, I said bluntly. He grinned as though that had been the most amusing thing I could have said. Of course not. He agreed, but you'll find out soon enough. Why can't you just tell me now? I demanded. Where would be the fun in that? He said, I think I'd rather see how long it takes you to figure it out. But I started. He held up a hand to silence me. Don't waste your breath arguing, he warned. And don't worry about your other duties. I'll handle those. Just get your things and follow me. We have a plane to catch. He stepped back into the shadows, leaving me alone. I looked down at the little disc. It was cool to the touch, even in the heat of the afternoon, and it made my fingers tingle pleasantly. I breathed in deeply and caught the lingering trace of that heady scent. Who the hell are you? I muttered. Well, I've already told you, but if you haven't figured it out, there's not much point in repeating myself, came the reply. I scowled and stuffed the little device into my pocket. Let's go then, I called. He laughed again and stepped out of the shadows. You'll want to pack for the cold, he advised me. Your new partner doesn't really do warm. Great, I muttered. My new godparent was annoyingly good at keeping secrets. I was tempted to turn on my sight and peek inside his head, but I knew he'd have the right spells up to prevent me from seeing anything. But if there was one thing I had learned, it was that the old gods could be a pain in the ass. We flew all night and then all day, hopping
Sounds
from
like
plane
a
to
little bit
plane,
of a
from
wrecking
airport to airport. I didn't recognize any of them. I had no idea where we were going. The last place we stopped was an old military airstrip. There were a few other people around, mostly humans. Who are these people? I asked the godfather. He glanced at me. You really have been living under a rock, he said. They're the ones who brought the gods back. They're called the Oculus. I looked at them, a group of mortals, risking life and limb to restore the gods to their rightful power. And they still want us here, I said. I would have thought the gods would kick them to the curb. No, the godfather replied. They've been very useful, and they still have plenty of uses. Like now. So, they're slaves? I guessed. The godfather shrugged. What else are mortals good for? He asked. I didn't bother trying to argue with him. It was pointless to him and to many others. Humans were expendable and disposable. That was just the way things were. I stepped out of the plane, and a blast of cold hit me. Fuck me, I muttered, drawing my coat around me. Don't like the cold? The godfather asked. I shot him a dirty look. Where are we? I demanded. Armenia, he said, looking out across the flat, white landscape. Armenia? I repeated. That's like the Arsend of nowhere. What are we doing here? Your new partner is here, he replied, and she wanted to meet you in private. She? I echoed. That was a surprise. All of the other godparents were men. I couldn't even imagine what this woman would be like. You should be more open-minded, dear, the godfather admonished me. I'm not a fucking misogynist, I snapped, but the godparents are always men. Not anymore, he said. He looked out into the snow-covered wilderness, then smiled. Ah, there she is now. A figure emerged from the blinding whiteness. She was a tall, slender woman. She was dressed in a thick white fur coat that made her look twice her actual size. Her face was pale, almost ghostly. Her eyes were a piercing ice blue, and her hair was the color of the moon. "Hello, Dionysus," she said, her voice soft and cold as the winter wind. "It's Dante," I replied, stepping forward to greet her. "I prefer Dionysus," she said, shaking my outstretched hand. Her skin was like ice, and her touch made me shiver. "Well, aren't you full of surprises?" the godfather said. He didn't seem remotely bothered by the biting cold. "It's nice to meet you," the woman said. "I've heard a lot about you." "You too," I lied. I hadn't heard a word about her until a few hours ago. "You've probably never heard of me," she said. "Why are you wasting time with pleasantries?" The godfather interrupted. "I have places to be, and you're going to need these." He handed me 2 silver discs. They were a little larger than the first, and they had the same knotwork design etched into their faces. "The same as the last ones," the godfather said. "One for temperature control, one for sense." I put the discs in my pocket. "Are we done?" I asked, turning to the godfather. "Yes," he said. "But remember, this is important. Don't fuck up." With that, he disappeared. I turned back to the woman. "So," I said, "what now?" "We have a job to do," she replied. "Aren't you going to introduce yourself?" I asked. "I did," she said. "You're Dionysus, son of Zeus. I'm the new godparent." "You didn't give me your name," I pointed out. She paused, then shrugged. "Artemis," she said, "but call me Rhea." I stared at her, as in, the goddess of the hunt. I said slowly. "Yes," she replied, sounding bored. "I thought Artemis was a guy," I said. "That's just a rumor," she said. "Okay," I said. "Then, who's the other one?" "The other what?" she asked, looking irritated. "The other godparent," I clarified. "There are always 2. "Oh," she said, understanding. "Him." "So, it is a guy?" I said. "Yes," she replied. "Apollo."
Okay.
"Apollo," I said incredulously.
Okay, I have the gist. Nope. Moving on. Stellines. Interesting. More likely to choose reasonable alternatives variety or retry. Huh.
"If this were an Agatha Christie mystery," said George Cowles, "we'd need a country estate with a faithful retainer, an aging lord, and an ancient housekeeper with a suspicious mind." The group chuckled and exchanged amused glances as the attractive young man looked around at them. He had them hooked. He had the hook, and now it was time for the bait. We need a good story to go along with our new museum, and since I don't see a house full of aging heirs and suspicious staff around, we'll need to do some creative storytelling for the visitors. It's important we don't oversell our modest collection, but we shouldn't be too modest. It's important people don't come away with a sense of disappointment or false expectations. What we want are visitors who leave with an interest in history. The small group of city employees was assembled at the museum site, in a rented hangar in a tiny airfield a half hour out of Washington, D.C. 3 young city planners, a public relations person, 2 historians from the local library, and an interior designer from a local firm who specialized in museum layout and design. Also in attendance was a representative of the city's financial group and their lawyer. And the best story I can think of that will set our modest collection in the appropriate context is this. The young man smiled and nodded as the others listened with rapt attention. The young man's voice dropped into a more intimate and conspiratorial tone as he began weaving his story, as if he were a grandfather sharing his favorite tale with young grandchildren. "This is the story I came up with," he said, his voice becoming slow and theatrical as if he were setting the scene for a children's bedtime story. "Let us imagine," said George, his voice growing more serious as his eyes moved from person to person, "that at one point in our history there were men and women with extraordinary abilities. These were men and women who, because of their remarkable abilities, were in the public eye, or at least some segment of the population. Not like today, when any misguided person with a blog or website can set themselves up as the latest authority on the paranormal and start spewing all sorts of nonsense and conspiracy theories. But back in those days, men and women who could really do extraordinary things had to work at keeping it a secret from the rest of society. There are stories of circus performers in the early part of the last century who would drink poison as part of their performance. But it turns out their remarkable immunity to the poison was a result of their drinking it all the time. This is not far-fetched," George went on, looking at the group and seeing they were all watching and listening to him. "The people who have extraordinary abilities don't want the rest of society to know. We may think if the world knew, they'd be heroes or celebrities. But in the past, in those rare times when one of them became known, it never worked out for them. The world treated them as monsters or as freaks." The lawyer looked over at George. "Why not? In this age of celebrity culture, if people knew they were extraordinary, they could be the next superstar. And even if it didn't last, it's hard to imagine people treating them badly." The interior designer said, "You could be right, but just remember the public's fickleness. When people get to know a celebrity or a hero, they begin to look for faults. They want to be able to tear them down. If they're too nice or too perfect, people get annoyed and start picking apart their behavior. We live in a culture that expects our heroes to fail and is always waiting for that failure so they can have their hero fall flat on his or her face. That's one reason the celebrities we know, the ones we see every week in the media, they never last. People start tearing them apart and finding ways to be disappointed with them." George smiled. "Well said, Miss Madison. In the past, if there were men and women who could do extraordinary things, then we have to assume that they did a good job keeping that knowledge away from the rest of us." One of the historians from the library spoke up. "The Bible makes reference to this in the book of Genesis. And in the book of Samuel," added the other librarian,
Got any more
a
esoteric?
man in his 50s who had an almost identical voice to George Cowles. "I don't think there's any doubt the Bible mentions people who could do things we think are impossible. And I can give you a reference from ancient Greece," added the interior designer, "and an example of one who was known publicly for what she could do. The name Pythias is well known and means something close to sacred or priestess."
There's one. Young man's voice. A group city. The city's financial group. The financial group.
"And I from the Necronomicon," said the legal rep of the finance company. "There is reference to a sorcerer named Abdul al-Hazred. There are those who say he could travel through time." The three planners laughed, and the two librarians nodded their heads knowingly. "Okay," George chuckled. "So it's safe to assume that there are examples throughout history where someone with abilities made a difference. But the real question is, were any of them ever in the military, or did any of them do anything of great public consequence? The real question is, were any of them working behind the scenes? Maybe doing great things to save our country without us ever knowing about them. Wouldn't that be exciting?" The interior designer nodded. "We could give some weight to your story with some displays on secret agents."
Oh, hold on. One moment.
Yep.
I just wanted to hear you say this.
The lawyer rep of the finance group intoned. "I hid Julia Child and Roald Dahl with tasked to fuck certain folks from I-6. Fuck them for information." One of the planners raised a finger. "We should have a name for them. For those with these extraordinary abilities. We should call them what we used to call the people of ancient Greece. What was the term they used? The blessed ones." The man sitting next to her spoke up. "Maybe the Thrope." "Maybe they are called Alphas," suggested one of the planners. The PR man smiled. "Let's call them Singularitarians." The lawyer's voice ran out as if they had arrived at a great decision. "We should call them Singularitarians, if for no other reason than the fact it would confuse people. The rest of society thinks singularity refers to a theoretical point in time when a computer reaches a state of artificial intelligence. And there is no such thing as an artificial intelligence," added George, his voice steepening again, sounding more like the older man he was pretending to be anymore. "Then there's a such thing as a computer that can think." "Right," said the lawyer, in the vernacular. "They're not real. So by calling people with extraordinary abilities Singularitarians, we'll be saying the computer's singularity is as unreal as the existence of these Singularitarians." "Excellent," George replied. He turned to the PR man. "When do we announce this to the press?" "Not for a week yet. That should give us enough time to set this in motion. If we do this properly, this story will take on a life of its own and go viral, if I may use that term." The PR man continued. "Our public relations team will be preparing a statement with supporting information from various historical documents, saying this collection has come to light only after decades of careful and painstaking work on the part of a retired British professor who made this his life's work." George added, "This gives us an air of mystery as well, doesn't it?" This story should create enough excitement and mystery to generate media interest and make it sound as though there's much more here than what we can show at a glance. How did we acquire the collection? One of the planners asked. Do we say it's a donation, or was it purchased? Should we say it's a joint acquisition? In either case, where's the money coming from? The PR man was nodding. That's one of the most interesting aspects of this whole idea. In my opinion, there's only one group that would have this sort of collection, the military. Of course, the interior designer exclaimed, looking around the small group. This was collected by a group of military officials with ties to the military and their funding. A group that's been keeping a secret all these years. This has got to be an idea that was cooked up by the military and kept secret from the rest of society so as to ensure these singularitarians weren't treated as monsters. If there are examples from history where some were treated as monsters or as freaks, then you'd be hard-pressed to deny that was a risk at the time. Of course, added one of the planners, it's only a guess. It could have been the FBI or even some other country's secret police, like the old KGB in the Soviet Union, that could have collected these artifacts. And who knows what country or countries might have had some of these individuals working for them, behind the scenes, doing good and staying out of the public eye.
No, wait, hold on.
And
Yep, there we go.
And so it happened. The exhibition was a success, and the public averted their gaze from the singularity as a concept. But once computers were able to think, we called them mentats. The mentat program, or military project, had not been classified, and the concept of the program was known, though it had been kept quiet and low-key. And now there were rumors in the news media and in various websites of the military using special operators with superhuman abilities. Their idea being that these special agents, with their extraordinary abilities, were working on our behalf, secretly and in the background, to help the US government to achieve the common good. The government would neither confirm nor deny the existence of these special operators, and when asked directly, would just say there was a secret government program called the Mentat Program, and it was a special intelligence project to assist in national defense. The story of this program, of a special group of soldiers, and the secret program spread through the news and was picked up by various news sources. There was an element of the public that would never believe the truth. For those who believed, it was a matter of national security and could not be revealed. As to the skeptics who questioned the existence of special intelligence forces with special abilities, they were mostly ignored or laughed off as tinfoil hat, conspiracy. And the next week would liquidate the believers. The government knew better than to make claims they couldn't prove, but as it happened, they were able to do so because no one wanted proof. All of this was known to George Cowles, as it had been his plan to make it so. As George's own ability allowed him to be the greatest liar, he had the power to see that others believed his lies, to the extent that they even believed in the story he was creating for them. The idea, the myth, and the stories created a narrative that the public accepted, and that was that.
All right. Next one. Fresh coffee.
when a group of friends gathered in London for the premiere of a low-budget 3D horror film. They were all delighted to bump into one another until their good friend David Bellamy turned up dead, drowned in a wash basin. For reasons none of them understand, they are forced to embark on a race against time. If the five of them are to live, they will need to go to extraordinary lengths to outwit those in pursuit. Because one is quite mad, another is an internationally feared terrorist, a third is an eccentric billionaire with too many secrets, and a fourth a high-ranking British peer. While the last and most intriguing of the suspects is completely anonymous and utterly ruthless.
Where are the
The
friends?
Plony Experiment. A group of five longtime friends, one of them being a famous and brilliant inventor by the name of David Bellamy, gathers for the premiere of an independently financed horror film, which they hope will be a huge hit at the box office. But after their reunion, the group finds themselves trapped, pursued in the dark and eerie catacombs far beneath London, where, they've learned, one of their good friends is a cold-blooded killer. Now this ragtag team must put aside past grievances to evade capture, survive the twisting subterranean catacombs, and discover the identity of the ruthless murderer, and uncover the horrifying experiment. The Papers of Randall Shadrach. The year was 1752. The setting was a remote Caribbean island that was rumored to contain an astonishing, somewhat bizarre, treasure trove. Then Sir Francis Walsingham, the Secretary of State for Queen Anne, sent a top-notch spy called Randall Shadrach to steal the prize from its hiding place, codenamed the Ark of the Covenant. And, true to form, Shadrach successfully managed to carry out this dangerous mission until the theft of the great treasure became the cause of a war. As Shadrach himself wrote long ago, and would continue to do even unto his death.
And
It
afterwards.
is with considerable trepidation that I sit down to record this episode. Not because of its content, for though remarkable it was, I had been involved in far more extraordinary incidents of an espionage nature than it. It was due rather to the personal tragedy into which it led me, and from which I may never recover. Matilda's tale. Matilda's husband was a very powerful man. It would therefore come as little surprise to learn that he was assassinated. But Matilda knew exactly why this happened, and for revenge she began writing her memoirs of his dark days when he ruled Europe from the Kremlin. After many twists and turns, and the emergence of new characters and events that no one could have predicted, Matilda's own life was lost. Now all we know is that her manuscripts lay with others in an archive in the Ural Mountains, where they await discovery. House of Strata has come. A greater evil. A better device. Find it now. The single lasting thing. If 200 million people were told to hide a leaf under any given square meter of ground anywhere on the planet, what would be the best means of searching? A team of researchers come up with a highly scientific device called the Shed-Dobson Geosensor M83 that locates the leaf. But this highly specialized machine, built at a cost of hundreds of billions of dollars over many years, works too well, pinpointing not just a single leaf, but countless numbers of plants in virtually every area on the Earth, including nuclear submarines, fighter jets, and a very secret Chinese mountain cave. Now China, North Korea, Cuba, Egypt, and Iran all demand equal ownership of this democratic geosensor, with the USA wanting none of it at all. But once the world finds out how useful this instrument really is, they'll no longer need anything else at all, and no government will need spies to collect intelligence or terrorists to destroy enemies. What started out as an intriguing exercise in reverse thinking and geological engineering soon develops into a threat against governments everywhere, even those few that are democratic. The next best device. You have 1 minute to stop a war between us. I hope for your sake that you think of something when a new type of weapon comes online and targets a large part of Europe's military might. Not just Britain or the West will suffer, but Eastern Europe and Russia. This could lead to a devastating scenario. When an American scientist who is aware of both the new weapon and the European nations who secretly created it is brutally kidnapped, a team of experts are sent by MI6 to rescue her. Or, if she can't be saved, track her killers and somehow get a fix on their mysterious leader whose identity seems to transcend national boundaries. And that person seems determined to start a worldwide conflict for whatever reason he himself can conceive. A clean slate. How can a woman who is being threatened with murder ever feel safe? She can't. For it to happen again would be far less a problem. The trouble for most of us is that when faced with that kind of challenge, how would we solve it? And how many might end up paying for a criminal act that might not have otherwise been carried out? But what if a former spy now turned into a detective and working alone was called in and allowed to use some of his special tricks to solve the case in the most unusual way any such puzzle may have ever been addressed, leaving perhaps not the final twist, but perhaps the very next stage that leads to the answer but leaves the killer's true identity shrouded in mystery. The library, the butcher and the murderer. In an era when everyone thought the 1930s to be civilized, few thought of a killer, especially someone as clever and well placed within society as John. After committing multiple homicides with impunity, he found himself challenged to a showdown by the local police, one which resulted in the arrest of another, a killer who murdered for pleasure, the very sort that the law might have overlooked in its eagerness to bring in anyone that would provide enough circumstantial evidence to put their case to court. Yet there was one aspect about him that seemed totally out of character with someone who took pleasure killing people. Was he indeed a cold-blooded murderer, or had a series of strange circumstances driven him to kill so indiscriminately? And if it was only circumstantial, could that possibly also be applied to the case against the man who was now held accountable for the many murders he had committed all those decades ago, but which might never have been perpetrated in the first place? Another day, another delivery. For most companies providing the kind of service that was delivered to the address in central London, each day would probably not have led to so much anguish. But then this company was like no other in many ways. For a start, the delivery boys were actually highly skilled and talented female agents working undercover from MI6. But today, just when they were not quite expecting anything more than the usual kind of deliveries, a woman came onto the scene and everything went into turmoil. As it happened, she was not quite what anyone might expect her to be, which would lead to some highly unusual twists to their otherwise uneventful delivery schedule. One step away. In the summer of 2002, 3 senior officers in MI6 made an important discovery when they became suspicious of certain operations that one of them had recently been assigned to carry out. It quickly became apparent that some people at high levels within their own organization might want those operations stopped before anything about them was revealed to their friends and allies throughout the European Union and beyond. So the decision was made to create their own operation, decide to find out why, but things didn't turn out too well. The one who set up the response program soon found himself under close scrutiny. In no time at all, this led to his house being destroyed with most of his family buried beneath it, even though they were on holiday at the time. How he reacted to that particular event set him and an ex-MI6 colleague, whose family had been brutally wiped out some years before, on a very dangerous trail where few, if any, of the participants might survive the final resolution.
Alright. New story. Writer's Demon.
in the blue of the streetlight that shone through the old truck's windshield spindle, the golden spider riding in the passenger seat that wasn't intended for anyone under 500 pounds, gave voice to her irritation. They will take food for such a party from a convenience store and supermarket, yet for the celebration we will dine on prepackaged sandwiches. She had many titles: the Ferryman who never existed, and Lord of the Shadows of Unexpectance being among the most current. No one, however, had ever named her Gracious. Dusk, the Widowmaker, sighed and carefully shifted the truck into gear. They didn't want to draw attention to themselves, so they took care that his signal was late in switching, and they stopped an extra beat too long at the stop sign. It was not an exciting way to travel, but it was the smart way, and the Widowmaker was not given to displays of pique. His honorifics, as they were generally few, were varied and could get particularly imaginative when his subordinates were really trying. They were not his subordinates here. The passenger seat of the big truck was still far too high for him to properly occupy, so he rode as far forward as possible on the edge of the cushion, peering through the sloped windshield as if there were no spider's corpse blocking his line of vision. There's a party tomorrow, and some of the members of the Hells Angels are having a party tonight, he explained, patience an ingrained habit. So most of the ones I talked to decided that going out to celebrate tonight would mean spending too much time out of the bed. Spindle shrugged. Dusk noticed a twitch in the corner of the spider's lips. She would have smiled if she knew how. I have every hope, she told him, that the members of the Hells Angies, Hells Antangies, will be quite happy with the dinner which we can provide, and you needn't be offended when they prefer their meals shrink-wrapped. Her tone was dismissive and light, and Dusk wished he had not been so patient. It would be nice, on his last night as the first ambassador to Earth, to actually be listened to. His phone rang, the little display screen glowing a white that was not quite day, and he read the caller's ID. Chloe. In the same moment, Spindle offered him, a touch breathlessly, the polite response expected of any noble. It would, perhaps, be better if you were to drop me off before you complete your trip up the mountain. I would like a chance to survey the lay of the land and to stretch. It would also, no doubt, make her feel less self-conscious, though she should have more pride than to suggest they split up just to allow her to recover from an admittedly uncomfortable experience. Still, her willingness to admit she was uncomfortable made it easy for him to ignore the surge of irritation and answer the phone without thinking too hard about Spindle and her reasons and a host of other things which should have preoccupied him if his brain wasn't constantly occupied with a ringing phone. Spindle sensed this new annoyance, of course, and fell silent, all unspoken thoughts forgotten in an attempt to track what was going wrong with her noble. Dusk, Chloe said in his ear, and it was not, he noted, ordinary, mildly concerned. Oh, how annoying to wake someone on a restful holiday tone. Something was genuinely troubling her. Have you heard anything from Vinny? She asked, but did not wait for his answer. Because I have. Something twisted behind his breastbone. The feeling had the quick, wet texture of terror, and it wrapped his heart in thick tentacles of nausea. Why? He managed after a too long moment. His mouth had become, somehow, as dry and arid as a winter river. He isn't at work. That is all. He wished she were here. It would not have helped matters at all, but Chloe could fix nearly anything. No, Dusk, it isn't. Because he was arrested this morning and now he's dead. A motorcycle gang, they think, but no one knows. Apparently I'm the only one listed in his contacts. They didn't tell me. They're saying he was murdered. He never mentioned that part of his life. Dusk, why doesn't anyone know these things? We can help, Chloe. Dusk assured her, but his mouth was so dry and cloyy. No, he did not want her involved. There was no need. Vinny had enemies. It was part of doing business, and the youngest Sata was well able to take care of himself. Probably better, in fact, if he were not already in trouble. Still, he would not allow the others to scare her, no matter what they planned or intended. He could do this. Spindle blinked slowly in an attempt to ease a discomfort she had. He could see, never before suffered, and his throat was a cold ball in his chest. Dusk wanted a fight. More importantly, his Chloe wanted help. He could make it all right. It had never occurred to her before, but she thought, listening to the chauffeur, that the chauffeurs who always brought her home were old men. Why hadn't she noticed it? Was it possible the pestilence, when it rose, was not interested in the young and healthy and only left their corpses broken on sidewalks? It could well be that only the frail were driving, and how could she know?
I'm gonna do one more. There's two more. Maybe two more. This time I'm gonna write up Writer's Demon, little by little, little by little.
Max seemed a healthy 15-year-old. She was excited about living with another ordinary human or parahuman. High-ranking Judith Finney's wondered, seated with the police investigation officer James Finney before what passed as parahuman youth services under the urn in Lubeck. Both the preteen boys at her home last night seemed to display extraordinary strength, but once they arrived, her own body felt strangely weak, as if their will could affect hers as they spoke. They convinced, above the clamoring police officers below the raised helicopter floor, who argued like miners off Ritalin, to violate protocol, contact her colleagues among parahumanity hiding in the hopes of rescue and / or revenge. And the need she, Mac, felt to help in the defense was strong. Even the pilot she had a history, but only a vague sense, who'd helped them in flight, was dead. They should come for us, the older teen stated. He'd said his name was Edward Pye with a kind of carefree disgust. His features darkened further as she found the same quiet wisdom he suggested written among countless cormorants hovering beyond the darkness, swallowing the half-mile, a sea stack and land. So she told Venise, in her panic, that he might mean the Merseyans. She wondered idly why an ocean bird. No, Mama, miss, my friends, like they're all mine and yours, even Mac there, forever. I mean people with power and promises, words and will, song and yes, sometimes even guns. Usually money's where everyone good around town gets weapons. Oh, Wunderbrunn, most haven, no question. Who knew we might get so rich, or so soon? His light reflecting eyes lit the emptiness until it seemed inhabited. He sighed, but in your oldest sad types without just ideas against ours should answer more on justice. Venise clenched behind damp lavender mesh breathers tight and the helmet on sweat cooling all around beneath Star's Mac. Eyes brighter under webbed glove bands, reopened mouth that both showed bright brittle strontium planking metal landing devices thrashed. Till after 8 flights over frigid surge, boiling swells slowing, still bright cinnabar beneath bunched strutless fingers. Then they'd recognize we got some power for the future, when folks stopped being afraid, or just plain sick of war. He'd said that a full 18 Earth hours after their return to Lubeck for all concerned in this boom, including his hostess love, she'd found his face as transfigured as his younger brothers, with their eyes like bright points at the focus of vastness. Under low firm wave shifting magnesium haze, silver glass, steel feet taking running wig down the edge, a cliff he turned left from her in a hissing spray, and his form had vanished without a sign but that she'd thought of the boy in the sea. Part bioinformatica, advanced tech and hard alien beacons. Omnidescent, his sonic transduction of light into coherent sound as he serenaded on Earth, of which he'd become custodian during past climactic shock. Felt again. Yesterday prayer, and the interior priestess Anoloa. Reformation, Isairia, brought years of growth and change before the Third German Concordat imposed parliamentary unity 10. Nations broken during her decades, almost 8 days, then ed 1660 billions on 4 ships northbound had lasted till less months given to Jer's new home, Durden's 5 life. Emwena foam itself in. What happened it does humanity if to outgo one other path up space aliens colonists themselves owns in. Oh, the latest our radio, and all these ways his earth, was what followed used at an ever-increasing rate and no one knew. So a long way to go. He wondered why he should have any part, if his thoughts and actions, however, did nothing, or were useless, or not yet enough. He could see no alternative to entering that world. There could never be anything better, he supposed, than discovering some way his voice sang a new future. Glorious ideas seemed presumptuous, while Hov Zero hash lows were limited, not certain path, but he would not do nothing, not find the way. If only there could some place, an oasis of security where his body did no harm, for the sound, the meaning. Then and he could sing whatever, whichever, wherever he pleased. And at any speed you could dream or desire, in a way that he could pass that opportunity by or thought just skim the surface. He had always known that. Though because for different reasons why some deep instinct caused an electromagnetic. Emot to your third dim, it was something he felt too vividly. Something unbearable. This knowledge of others who shared it though in no real sense understood. A sense. He needed them and had known for a long, very long while. It meant a life with people. People beyond anyone's wildest dream because, and so much. Yes, it was a dream.
Alright, that's it for now.